everyone, and welcome to RELEX Live Talks, our monthly LinkedIn Live series. We're live on the second Wednesday of every month, and we bring you the latest and most interesting topics in the world of retail, CPG, and manufacturing. So today we delve into the world of uncertainty. My name is Casey McSherry, and I'm joined by two experts on the topic, Madhav Durbha and Richard Huston. Madhav, Richard, welcome, and please introduce yourself. Madhav, why don't you go first?
Sure. Thanks, Casey. Look forward to the conversation. I'm Madhav Durbha. I'm Group Vice President of Industry Strategy at RELEX Solutions. My background, I spent 25 years in supply chain tech, a lot of it to do with supply chain planning and supply chain design. And it's been a phenomenal journey. But what's interesting is just in the last 3, 4 years, now I no longer need to explain what I do for a living. When I say I'm in supply chain, everybody understands. So, you know, part of it, I would say, thanks to the uncertainty in some way, right? So, the topic of today's conversation. So, good to be here.
Thanks for being here.
Hi, I'm Richard Huston. I'm a Senior Director of Field Strategy here at RELEX. Been here 3 years. Background came from industry, both in retail, wholesale, and also in CPG manufacturing. So I'm excited for these topics today and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. I mean, everybody seems to be talking about uncertainty, like you said, Madhav, the unpredictability of the world and the market, this applies to supply chains too. So Richard, what do you think causes some of this uncertainty?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about changing consumer trends and the economic conditions. So inflation really has driven up costs and prices over the past few years. Average consumer spend has increased, but also the amount of money that they have available because of core costs being different really has decreased. So the consumer is shifting to value. Discretionary funds are 15 to 30% less on various categories. Retailers are running promotions that for a few years they were limited or not at all, and now they're prolific, with 90% of US top retailers sort of prioritizing unit growth, creative promotions, and are taking center stage again, really to grab that attention of the consumer with cautious spending at this point. But on the logistics side, logistics costs have gone up dramatically. There's driver shortages, of which we need over 1 million drivers in the next decade to make up for the shortage. And also there's a labor shortage. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce said that 45% of job openings remain unfilled. And with the baby boomers exiting the workforce, that there's a huge need, and 1/3 of manufacturing workforce is over 55 years. So really, there's a lot of complex issues going on for supply chains and really a rapidly changing environment.
Absolutely. Madhav, do you have anything to add? Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you look at consumer trend shifting, I don't know how many of you tried the soda called Olipop, the brand. And it has gone from 2022. I mean, their whole thing is about plant-based and probiotic, but it is still a soda. 2022, I think they had a little over $200 million in revenue, and or 2023, and 2024 they're projected to hit over $500 million. So some of these brands catering to shifting consumer trends, whether it is to do with healthy, whether it is to do with plant-based foods, I think is seeing a lot of traction. So the dilemma it causes to manufacturers and retailers alike is to keep a close watch on these categories that are getting created and that are emerging, and see how to catch on the tide as it raises, right? So it's going to be an interesting dynamic. A couple of things I would add to what Richard said. One is geopolitics. If you look at the world around us, I mean, over 60 countries this year are democratically electing their leader of the nation. What it means is sometimes a shift in power. What that also translates to is shift in foreign policy and accordingly the trade flows across the globe. The other thing is the geopolitical, related to the geopolitical conflict, is we all know about the hot spots across the world right now. Just to pick on an example, Sudan has got internal conflict going on at this point in time. Just so that you know, Sudan supplies 70% of gum arabic to the world. Where is gum arabic used? If you like soft drinks, carbonated beverages, one of the key ingredients in that. And cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, so on and so forth. And 70% of the supply is concentrated in one pocket of the world. This is just the reality of the world that we live in, right? So when I talk to some of our beverage customers, what they tell me is they have about 3 to 6 months worth of inventory right now for gum arabic, but they're keeping a close watch on the situation and looking at alternate sources of supply. So these are the kind of challenges that companies have to wrestle with when it comes to uncertainty.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors at play. And so with some of the customers like you work with specifically, how do these sources of unpredictability show up in supply chain and retail CPG? Richard, do you have any examples that come to mind?
Sure. A lot of it has to do with suppliers, really, both from a raw materials and then from a retailer standpoint also. So there's really been unpredictability about when you're going to actually get your products over the past few years. Now, that's sort of what we're hearing in the marketplace, is that that's sort of been shifting over the past year or so, that really supply chains have gotten better. Products are available, raw materials available, but not in all instances, not for all suppliers, and especially not in certain categories. So really that causes quite a bit of disruption in the supply chain, really, when you have unpredictability about your own materials to really make your own sales. So that's one of the key things. And then, as was mentioned, it's really about how do I get a workforce that can actually, solve my supply chain issues, right? A lot of organizations have older solutions, really needing to up-level what they're doing, really to be more cloud-based, to be more proactive, to be more exception-based, to really have visibility to the issues and then have quick response to the issues. So we really see a struggle in the organizations about how can we do that effectively, and looking for new technologies to sort of shift that.
Yeah. And Madhav, what do you think? Customers are struggling with specifically?
Richard hit the nail on the head, right? It's variability and complexity. When you look at variability, it's not just supply side, but also on the demand side, right? And your own internal resources, labor availability, all these are introducing variability or increasing variability. But from a complexity standpoint, if you think about the consumers and how we are consuming, we are driving a lot of channel complexity. When I talk to CPG companies, Amazon is a growing channel for them now, right? Direct to consumer is also becoming increasingly prominent. Actually, direct to consumer is one of the fastest growing channels, in percentage terms for companies. And so all this introduces variability. To layer in on top of that is change in regulation. European Union has passed the Corporate Due Diligence Act, which is around, or CS3D it is called. Well, it is about making sure that organizations are held responsible for maintaining transparency upstream into their supply chain, right? So change in regulation is something that organizations need to cope up with as well. And last but not the least, what we have seen recently is too many single points of failures within the organizations. Even if you get your house in order within the four walls of your company, what happens at a supplier or a supplier's supplier could potentially impact your ability to serve your customers. So what I see organizations are looking for is build optionality into their supply chain. Optionality in terms of sources of supply, modes of transportation, establishing more nodes in the network. However, optionality causes some tension as well when it comes to cost management, right? Because anytime you build options in terms of supplier base, you can't concentrate all your volume to one supplier and get all the price breaks that you can get. So this is the kind of dynamic that organizations need to manage. And I think about the role of supply chain leaders these days is juggling, right? You're juggling all these multiple balls up in the air and trying to catch them all.
Yeah. So optionality, upgrading legacy systems. How else can retailers and CPGs, manufacturers risk-proof their operations?
So from my perspective, we've seen some examples out there, and one of it is around scenario planning, because what organizations are trying to do is to be responsive and resilient in their supply chains. So one of the ways to do that is to actually model the digital twin and make changes. So for example, one really large retailer recently reduced their inventory 33%. And as you can imagine, for a retail organization, out in the operations level, at the store level, people were wondering what the heck was going on, right? How are we going to survive this? But part of it was that they were able to do scenario planning in an environment, model the whole change, optimize their inventory levels, reduce those safety stocks that were just sitting on the shelves. And really the end result was they saw no reduction in availability to the end consumer. So, but the key to that was first being able to do a what if scenario, and then secondly, get organizational approval to really go forward with that and sort of make it happen. So that was one instance. Another changing environment is around for fresh CPG companies. We've been seeing that the retailers have such a high percentage of spoilage that's been happening from those products that really they're saying, okay, stop this. How can we stop this? Obviously, we're not good at it. So they're pushing back to the CPG companies to really say, we want you to manage the inventory. We want you to deliver it. We want you to own this risk that's happening at retail and change the paradigm. So really, we're working with those organizations. And what we're seeing is that they're taking ownership, reducing the waste from 12+% to 4 to 8% of spoilage, and really doing VMI at the store level with daily planning and with feedback loops coming from operations in the field. So really getting that full circle feedback to be able to not only plan and reduce the inventory and the spoilage, but then to react when things are happening in the field.
Yeah.
Maybe I can add to what Richard talked about. Actually, there is a comment as well that I'm looking at. How does unpredictability drive innovation? I think it flows into what you're asking as well, Casey, in terms of how companies are responding to. Maybe we can tackle both at the same time. So I think Richard pointed out to the digital twins, right? The idea of digital twins, and then closing the loop with execution, learning from execution, and diagnosing the root causes for problems and addressing those. I may add one more thing. For the longest time, supply chain decisions were anchored around data that is sitting between the four walls of your company, within your ERP systems and so on, structured in a nice tabular manner, right? Increasingly, the world is changing so fast that organizations are looking to outside in signals, right? Being able to tap into external signals and being able to catch those early and detect those change points. So where the innovation is happening now is looking at structured as well as unstructured streams of data and being able to make these predictions. Not only make predictions, let's say if I'm predicting an out of stock, or to Richard's point earlier, if I'm predicting a spoilage for the inventory sitting in the stores or in my distribution centers, how do I quickly replenish to that, right? So being able to make prescriptive recommendations as well. There's a lot of innovation that is happening around AI and machine learning that we at RELEX are introducing into our products. We have been driving a lot of AI and machine learning over the last 15, 16 years, and customers are taking advantage of that. And increasingly, there is tremendous appetite for those kind of innovations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think unpredictability drives innovation by, if you remain agile, if you remain resilient, you'll problem solve eventually. Can drive some new ideas. So unpredictability, it seems like it would be a bad element anywhere, but is there any positive to it in the industry? Madhav, what do you think?
I think uncertainty is your friend. You need to embrace it. Actually, if you can harness the power of, how to deal with uncertainty, it can set you apart from your competition. So I always draw this analogy, right? It's like uncertainty is like a tiger that is chasing you. When the tiger is chasing you, do you need to run faster than the tiger? No. You just need to run faster than, if me and Richard are running and tiger is chasing us, I just need to run faster than Richard, right? So, the
Well,
key.
thanks, Madhav. Appreciate it.
I'm not going to challenge you on that.
Luckily, there's no tigers here.
but I think the key is to let's accept we live in a world where change is nothing but certain. So in a world like that, rather than fighting that, I think we should embrace it and turn that to our advantage. That's what I see organizations doing. In fact, one of the food manufacturers that we worked with, they were growing very fast, right? Just in the last 4 years, they doubled their business. Some of it organic, some of it is through M&A. So they embarked on their planning transformation journey. And guess what? When they embarked on this journey, pandemic broke out and everybody went remote. What did they do? They decided to double down on their digital transformation and started rolling out their deployment around demand sensing, demand planning, production scheduling, everything around RELEX platform. And now, their service levels have improved. In-stock positions have improved 5% year over year. Not only that, their business doubled and they did not have to proportionately increase the headcount. They had to only modestly increase their planner headcount, right? Not only that, the jobs of their planners have become far more fulfilling. They're no longer mucking around with the Excel spreadsheets and pulling all the data together, massaging the data and all that. Now they're in the driver's seat driving business decisions, engaging with the cross-functional stakeholders and making an impact, moving the needle for the business, the things that humans are best at, right? Collaborating with each other and solving problems, as opposed to sitting in my island and trying to pull together a bunch of 20 different spreadsheets to make sense of it. So that's just an example of how companies are, making uncertainty their friend.
It's a very powerful thing to harness the power of uncertainty. If you're able to do that, there's nothing you can't handle, really. Richard, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you have anything to add?
Sure. I think the past few years have taught us a lot about supply chains, right? As Madhav said, now people know what they are, the regular consumer and the regular friend and stuff. But really, the tools have changed dramatically over the past few years, and actually over the past 10 to 20 years. And what's really happening is this unpredictability is leading to organizations needing to rethink how they do their business. And really this rethinking is starting to say, okay, how can I become more predictable in my responsiveness to unpredictability, right? How can I harness the power of the data? Because when you think about it, Excel can't really handle the fact if I have store SKU level data for 100,000 SKUs in 2,200 stores. It's impossible for you to manage that. So really it says, I need automation. I need smart business rules that can execute, that can look for exceptions so that I become more valuable in terms of what I'm offering to the organization as a business user. And now I'm working on the things that make sense. As Madhav said, rather than doing the data collection, correlation, and analysis, I'm just taking action on those things that need to happen. I can look for other opportunities because now I have more powerful scenario planning. I can change multiple factors, see the impact before implementing that in my digital twins. So really, this opportunity sort of has grown and sort of pushed us in a sense, to say, we need to do something different. How can we do it different? How can we do it predictably? How can we do it smart? And how can we do it more effectively? Because our workforce is shifting, and we really need to up-level both the people, the time, and how we go effective to market. So really part of the key there is we've seen organizations, for example, in convenience stores, where they have 0 people doing forecast reviews. The forecast is taken as is. And these are fairly large retailers. And then also on store ordering, that it automates so much of the store ordering and the DC ordering process that less than 2% of the time that they're reviewing orders. So really the huge shift is from doing all the tactical things to really being more strategic, being more exception-based, and really leveraging the power of the people that you have to really work in a smarter, better, more effective, and more fun way. So.
Yeah, work smarter, not harder, right?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, Richard, what you're talking about just reminded me of a quote I heard recently, right? Say the power of AI and automation is not to turn humans into robots, but to take the robot out of the human so the best of the humanity shines forth. So I think the examples that you're sharing, especially in terms of, running almost like a autonomous mode, the aspect of the forecasting and replenishment. So humans are engaged to resolve exceptions as opposed to micromanaging the plan itself, frees up a lot of time. And but I think you also bring up another interesting point, Richard, is that it makes us think that with the workforce becoming more productive, how does the future of work change? How does the future of jobs change? What kind of skill sets do I need? How do I train my workforce? How do I invest in my workforce to make sure I take the best advantage of all these innovations that are happening? Is something that is top of mind for a lot of the leaders I speak to these days.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, what we're seeing in there also is because there is such power and is such a different paradigm compared to where they're coming from, a lot of that needs to happen from a change management standpoint in a crawl, walk, run mode, really. Yeah. So we were just talking with one organization of which, like, for example, one person said, just show me the table. I don't need the graph. But also it's the idea of, how do I shift what I'm doing to be more productive? Well, we've done it this way that long. You can't just jump from here to there, typically. So change really needs to come from a change management standpoint in a managed way. So really doing these projects, advancing in technology, and really doing that in a smart way that leads you to where you need to get to over time and not just in one day, really is a smart move for both the people in the organization and, once again, talk about predictability. You want to have predictable outcomes and maintain your good service level and your good customer response. So really doing that in a smart way makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And you touched on something like internal resistance to change. I would imagine that would be a big roadblock for companies trying to upgrade their systems, trying to, take back their time and take back some of their, needs for workers in really powerful ways. What are some other roadblocks that you think stand in between companies and like upgrading legacy systems? Madhav, what do you think?
Want me to go ahead?
Yeah.
Sure. I think the human factor is a big one that Richard was talking about as well. What I've seen organizations that have driven change successfully do is a couple of things. One is always lead with business opportunities first, right? Why are we driving the change that we want to drive is absolutely critical. We don't do technology upgrades just for the sake of technology upgrades, right? Yes, granted, there are issues around cybersecurity and other burning platforms sometimes that may force organizations to say we need to get off these dated systems and get to the latest and greatest. But more often than not, the change is driven by a couple of things. One is strong executive sponsorship right at the top, right? Leaders who understand the dynamic shifting, leaders who understand why the change is imperative for their organization and be able to articulate. That is the first thing. Then the second thing is focus on tangible business problems. Now, AI is all the talk, and Gen AI is the new shiny object and whatnot, right? But use them for what they're good at. I mean, Gen AI is good at certain things. AI in general is good at certain things. Use it for what it is good at, but focus on solving real, tangible business problems. And to Richard's point earlier, chunk it up into digestible pieces of phases of deployment and then go after them with full commitment and drive the organizational change that way. The tone need to be set at the top, the pace need to be set at the top, and then the conversations need to happen up and down the organization to drive that change.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard to get the ball rolling when there's resistance at the top.
I'll add in one other element that's brought topic to mind, and that's around really understanding our impact to the environment. Really, as we talk about things changing in the world, really understanding how can we be more efficient both within our organization but in the world we live in. So really it's been a shift to finally measuring these types of things, being aware of the impact when you make changes in your supply chain, and really having that be part of the decision-making process. So really sustainability, both from an internal and from an environmental standpoint, really becomes a hot area to be aware of, to grow in your capability, and to grow in, as always, it's about visibility first. You need visibility before you can take action. So once again, how do you model the supply chain and really understand the impact from a sustainability and environmental standpoint? Really, it's become also a key topic in a lot of executives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Casey.
No.
I think, Richard, you brought up a very important point, right? For the longest time I had been in supply chain decisions were always anchored around three factors, right? Your service levels, your cost, and your inventory, right? How do you trade off between these three elements? Now, carbon footprint is becoming an explicit trade-off element as well. Now, when you bring carbon footprint as the additional trade-off element, now what does it need? First thing is organizations need to have a good handle on their carbon footprint, whether these are your scope 1 emissions, scope 3 emissions, and whatnot, right? Really being able to understand the carbon footprint, then explicitly bringing that as additional lever or additional objective function against which you need to optimize your supply chain. That is becoming increasingly critical as well. And that's something we hear from our customers quite a lot these days, and which is what is driving us as well into variety of things we are doing in terms of carbon footprint modeling as well as optimization.
All excellent points. Well, I think we're just about to wrap up here. I see one question in the chat, though. Organizational change in a global environment requires trusting relationships. How is it best received? That's a good question. How do you build trust there?
So I'm assuming the question is referring to trusting relationships across your suppliers, and maybe across extending to your customers and consumers as well. The way I think about it is it all comes down to transparency, right? Being able to, you can't achieve what you don't measure, right? So first thing is measuring the environmental impact of your own products and what you bring to market, but also working in tandem with your suppliers. Guess what? I mean, even your suppliers are being driven to be more environmentally compliant these days, whether it is driven by regulation or whether it is driven by changing consumer trends and whatnot. So being able to acknowledge that we are in this together, making sure that organizations that have the heft and muzzle to help out their supplier ecosystem to embrace sustainability practices in their own production and in their own sourcing goes a long way. That's one way I see that happening.
Absolutely. Richard, what do you think about building trust?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot is about looking across your whole supply chain, really understanding on both sides. And really, as it was mentioned, measuring the KPIs and having everyone be aware of them and executing to them and working in a responsive way. So that's key to today's working environments.
Yeah, yeah. And that predictability versus unpredictability balance. Well, I think that we're done for today. Thank you both so much for joining us. Madhav, Richard, this was a pleasure. And to everybody else, please feel free to join us. Our next show, RELEX Talks Live, is on the second Wednesday of every month, 9 a.m. So our next call is going to be August 14th, and we'll be discussing forecasting accuracy.
Great.
This
Thanks.
was so
Have a
fun.
great day.
Thanks so much.
Take care.